Okay, all right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this hour, which is kind of the registry hour. So hopefully you can see there's a couple of different people that are going to be participating live in this session. First, myself. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Marlana Orloff, medical oncologist, Thomas Jefferson. And maybe we can just go around and introduce ourselves first, and then we'll get into the presentation. So go ahead, Chad.
Sure. Chad Kimbler. I'm a patient with primary disease, no metastatic, opted for enucleation in 2015, and live in Las Vegas, Nevada.
I'm George Rotacco. I'm the Executive Director of Client Services with Global Vision. We're the company that has been developing the MRF Vision Registry.
And my name's Rich Carvajal. I'm a medical oncologist at Columbia University, focused on developing new therapies for patients with ocular melanoma. So thank you for having us.
Okay, great. All right, so we have about an hour for this session. You'll be getting kind of two presentations as well as a demo. So I'm going to get right into the presentation. We're going to be talking about the patient-centered registry. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. Hopefully everybody can see my screen here. So Chad and I will be specifically talking about the CURE OM patient-powered, patient-reported registry, and this is an update. So for those of you who may not know, the registry has a name. It is called the Vision Registry, and you can see it up top there. So why create a patient-centered registry for ocular melanoma? So for those of you who haven't been part of the symposium or heard some of these talks before about the registry, just to give a little bit of background. So as you all know, ocular melanoma is a rare disease, and it's has complicated clinical care. So for those patients out there, you might have had, seen a retina doctor in one state, then got to an ocular oncologist in another state, and then saw a medical oncologist, maybe multiple medical oncologists, and traveled for clinical trials. So because it's, there's a bit of a complex patient journey, there's really not one entity collecting all the data. And certainly not one entity collecting data such as things like risk factors and patient experience. So again, just to highlight, the patients are often diagnosed in different locations. So it's really hard to really compile good chronologic information about demographics, environmental risk factors, and the natural history of disease. There's no cross-site patient-reported registry currently. And so again, a lot of the information that we have about patients is these kind of single snapshots that are coming from single centers, or if patients are participating in a clinical trial. And in this disease, there is no real consistent source of information for patient-reported outcomes, patient preference, and patient experience. For those of you who participated in clinical trials, sometimes things like patient-reported outcomes and quality measures are part of trials, but it's not consistent. And we do know that it's hard when there's a small number of researchers without one consistent repository of information. So again, for those of you who have been with CURE OM for a while and participating in these patient and caregiver symposium, you know where this has come from. But however, just want to give an update on kind of the timeline and to recap about how it all started. So a comprehensive registry for ocular melanoma in any form, honestly, has been discussed among members of the community for years. And there have been a couple of different efforts, but it really wasn't until the CURE OM Patient Symposium, so this very meeting back in 2016 in Atlanta, actually following a very powerful speech from a patient herself, Summer Heath, when then kind of CEO of Melanoma Research Foundation really pledged support to start this patient registry. Unfortunately, YouTube's not cooperating, so I can't link to it, but I will put this link in chat after we're finished, and you can go watch it on your own time. But really what unfolded at that meeting was the acknowledgement for all of those things that I just mentioned, why we need a patient registry. Certainly, there have been lots of additions, kind of since that initial meeting. And as you'll see, this is really just one of the 2 registries that I think is going to be a very comprehensive look at this disease. So this is, again, I'm talking more about the patient-centered, patient-entered registry, and Dr. Carvajal will be talking more about the academic registry. But as it pertains specifically to this patient-centered registry, again, was back in spring of 2016, where there was kind of a verbal commitment. Then just shortly thereafter, starting that summer, the CURE OM Unite campaign, which was really a grassroots fundraising campaign. All of the funds that were raised through that were helping to contribute to really the startup of this registry. And also that summer, hired a patient outcomes and registry advisor. And again, some of you may have heard me speak about this, but developing a registry is not something as simple as, making a survey and throwing it online. These are very complex programs requiring a really supportive platform. And we knew when we did this, if we were going to do it, we wanted to do it right. And we wanted to engage all patients and providers and other caregivers that may take care of OM patients. So that summer, we also organized an interdisciplinary working group, and we'll highlight that in a little bit, but really that encompasses, a wide variety of people to help us develop the best possible registry. So this wasn't just, one of us or 2 of us, and it wasn't just done by physicians, it wasn't just done by patients, it was really a group effort. And we really got together starting in summer of 2016, talking about what our aims are, what kind of questions we were going to ask, and really what did we want to get out of this. So from fall of 16 to summer of 17, we worked with a working group to identify objectives. And then in summer of 17 and fall of 18, really trying to identify technology platforms that would meet our unique needs. So again, we can say, okay, this started in 2016. We're now in almost 2021, but, really finding a partner, and ultimately we did with GVT, that would allow us to build a personalized registry. There were other kind of vendors that we took a look at that was kind of like, here you go, here's your kind of one size fits all registry. But we know that OM is unique. We know that the information and the objectives that we had were very specific to the population, and we really wanted a platform that was going to allow us to tailor the questions, the surveys, unique to the patient's OM journey. So then in fall of 18 into summer of 19, we worked to develop a data set. So really these are the types of questions we were going to be asking, and also to work to ensure international regulatory compliance. So because we are talking about patient information, we really needed to make sure that we were safe and compliant, not just in the US, but also outside the US, because the hope is eventually this will be international. And then fall of 19, really until winter of 2020, where securing funding. So MGH made a large donation, and then ultimately signed contracts with GVT as our platform provider. So from winter 2020 to now, really building out the data set, building the technology platform, obtaining things like IRB approval. As with anything, COVID, threw a little bit of a wrench in some plans. So there was a little bit of a delay earlier on in 2020, but things are moving, and I am so excited and so happy and to just even have launch on this timeline with the hopeful launch of first quarter of 2021. Okay. So just don't want to read through all of these word for word, but just to highlight what our aims are. So really to capture and record cases of OM in a standardized patient-reported online registry. So again, this is patients importing their own information. to help understand the disease, things like demographics, patient experience from onset to end. And there will be other questions, more specific to the diagnosis itself, try to get information about genetics, other risk factors, symptoms, treatments, outcomes, patient preferences, and quality of life. And really the purpose of this is to enhance the understanding of the variability and progression and natural history of uveal melanoma, with the ultimate goals of guiding and assessing therapeutic intervention, and to really base patient-centered recommendations and improve patient outcomes. Also to increase collaborative efforts between patients, clinicians, and researchers that could lead to discoveries that will improve outcomes for patients affected by this disease. Go ahead, Chad.
Thank you, Dr. Orloff. That was a great introduction. And I'll talk a few points about how this will benefit patients from our perspective. One thing that I don't think is really underscored on a patient registry is the fact that we have the ability to provide information about ourselves that can't be captured in any other setting. I mean, if you go to your medical oncologist or your ocular oncologist, they don't have time to sit here and ask you a whole battery of questions about who you are, where you came from, and all these other intricate details that are very important to our journey of having OM. We do know there's other registries, as Dr. Orloff stated, such as, state registries or academic registries and all these other registries, but they don't have the power that we have as a patient to provide our own information that will help direct research to help advance us. So benefits is obviously sharing data with all parties. So we will have the ability to direct where our information is going as a part of the IRB, which is the review board that will allow others to access the stuff, data that we have input. Again, it's coming straight from the patient or their legally authorized representative. So your mother, father, parent, sister, whoever you would authorize to enter that information. And it brings us together, that we are a small community, and it will allow us to see each other in terms of other experiences that we've had in terms of, being diagnosed or standard of care, as Dr. Orloff said. And then, of course, we can relate and learn from each other as well. And it'll help us and our families further understand our condition so we can take more action in our care and our advocacy in advancing research for OM. If you want to go to the next slide, Dr. Orloff. So the benefits for researchers and clinicians, I think I kind of underscored all of these things previously, but it supports things that are yet to be discovered, such as epidemiological research that we kind of don't have the information yet because our stories are quite complex, and geographic practice variations. So for example, I live in Las Vegas, but there is no ocular oncologist in my area, so I go to California, which doesn't seem very, important, but where is my information held? Am I a patient of Nevada or am I a patient of California? These things become very important when we try and understand, the progress and patient outcomes of our disease. Again, it supports the health and social services planning so we can understand more about ourselves. And of course, surveillance, post-marketing surveillance. So it'll help us understand, what are patients experiencing in terms of follow-ups for metastatic disease and those sorts of questions that we kind of don't have answers for right now. Like Dr. Orloff said, a lot of what's happening is regional, and it's fine because we get the care that we need, but we don't have a standard of care. We don't know what is a true patient experience because everyone may be experiencing something a little bit different. If you can go to the next slide, Dr. Orloff. And this has already been stated, but this gives you an idea of who is in the working group and the contributions and availability that we have. So of course, we have patients and family members, which is the center of the patient-powered registry. And we also have ocular oncologists, medical oncologists, it's of course very standard for this type of setting. And then we also have nursing, basic science, statisticians, National Eye Institute, and epidemiologists. So it's Dr. Orloff said, it's not like we went into a think tank with 3 or 4 people and said, hey, we're going to launch this thing. Part of that has led to quite a journey for us to get where we are. But it is something that will be very powerful once we go live. And then next we have a picture of our very first in-person working session. This was at the conference in DC. As you can see, there's a number of different individuals that are on the registry working group, where we first started discussing what would our data set look like, how would we choose a platform, and kind of getting things kicked off from a first in-person perspective and meeting each other, which was a great experience. And then next we'll talk about who can enroll. So, and I've seen this before where there's some patients that are not quite diagnosed with OM, but they're not, not diagnosed with OM. They have this weird in between, we're going to follow it and see what happens. So for you to enroll in the patient registry, you would need to be diagnosed with OM and be able to provide an informed consent to participate. The recruitment, as Dr. Orloff said, we're going to start in the United States, and then we do have plans to go global. As you've seen with our symposium this year, we have a large area of support from all different communities around the world to kind of share their experience and share updates of where we are in OM from a global perspective, which is something that is very, very, very unique that we've been able to pull off as a part of the symposium. And then I'll hand it over to Dr. Orloff for our long-term goals.
Okay. So these are just a few of our long-term goals. So number one, just as Chad has mentioned, to develop project plans to collaborate with international partners, starting with UK, Europe, Canada, and Australia. And this is already happening. Registry partners share expertise, resources, and success. Online registration training sessions for registry participants. And then ultimately really data analysis, research findings, and dissemination of results. So, it is going to take a bit of time, to get patients to input their data, to get a good data set, complete, and then ask the right questions, do the research, and disseminate the results. And certainly those results may be discussed at meetings like this, or there may be additional meetings that we set up to give updates about research coming out of the registry. We do need to continue to secure long-term funding. So it is one thing to get the funding to get this up and running, but in order for this to be successful, this needs to be ongoing for years. Because really, again, if we're really trying to understand the full patient journey and the natural history of all of this, this needs to be self-sustaining ultimately to get us, year after year, hopefully decade after decade. And then ultimately publications coming out of the research that's done through the registry. And then lastly, and this kind of will tee things up for the next presentation, is collaboration with the academic registry. So we didn't necessarily go through and give all of the information that the patient registry is going to be obtaining. But, as Chad so nicely kind of discussed, this is really, the patient reported registry is certainly asking questions that you may not otherwise talk to your doctor about: where you've lived all your life, potential risk factors, things like diet, exercise, lifestyle, how you feel about some of the decisions that you made about some of the treatments that you've had. So very unique set of questions, whereas the academic registry is going to be much more of what your physician has on file. So how big your tumor was, what the stage was, what the genetics were, what your treatments were, did the tumor's response to the treatment. And so ultimately, putting these two registries together, we will have the most comprehensive understanding of OM that you could possibly have. And it is our hope, even though these registries will be on separate platforms, that they will be able to communicate with one another. Okay, so now I'm going to stop screen share and turn it over to George, that actually is going to take us through a bit of a registry demo.
All righty. Can everybody see the screen okay? I guess so. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for being here. As Dr. Orloff and Chad have mentioned, the Vision Registry is designed as a secure system to help document and track your natural history journey and to monitor any progression throughout your condition. The system right now is in its final stages, which is very exciting, as everyone said. And I know we're shooting for Q1 as a launch, but we're really secretly shooting for January. So as quickly as we can, we're approaching the final stages of the system. This system is definitely a custom system. We've got a lot of experience in building these types of systems, and this one is a custom one, which is a very unique but special registry to us. As you can see on the screen, there's a couple things going on. What I'm going to show you here at the bottom is once you're registered, you'll be able to log in. However, there's some things on this screen that represent several patients that are sharing their testimonies as to why they're part of the program. The eventual goal is to share stories from this page so people can see exactly what's happening. Here's an example of someone you probably know and their journey and why they're part of this system. And that's the idea of this homepage, just to give some relevance and familiarity with several folks that are experiencing these different conditions. As a result of all this, when you're ready to register, as was mentioned, you can be the patient or you can be someone legally authorized. And either way you register, the form will change. So depending on who you are, this will update differently. There's some basic information that allows you to create your ID here. And this is how that's going to work, as well as some preferences as to how you'd like to be contacted. But if I scroll down, an informed consent was mentioned. This is similar to a terms and conditions of being part of the registry. And in order to register, you have to go through this, read through this, scroll down to the bottom, click that you confirm, and then click to register. Now, the registration process does pull you through certain things to set up security. This is a very secure system. We've been working in the registry world, in the clinical trial world, as well as both U.S. and international applications to have a very secure platform. Obviously, we have patient data in here, so we have to make sure that we have all of the protocols in place, such as 256-bit encryption. That's the lock that you see at the URL point on the website. So you'll see a little lock in front, similar to credit card or financial banking websites. You'll see a multi-factor, which puts you through different areas of identifying and authenticating where you are and who you are, so the data remains safe. You're going to have a set of security questions that you'll set up for your password, so that if you ever lose your password, you can retrieve it. There's auto timeouts and logout controls so that nothing is left open for any length of time. We definitely want to safeguard the system. Our servers are very highly secure and they're private, so there's not other companies that would be using outside of our company these servers with us. And a little bit background in us, we started in the clinical trial world probably about 22 years ago. And since then, we've had several platforms that have launched, but we are very focused in social services and human services as well. And some of that extends to child abuse and senior records and victim services. So all of those things are very important when it comes to the security. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to log in as someone who is in here. And remember, this is testing, but we should be okay. So a lot of times we wonder if everything is going to work in a test. This system.
George, can you
Yes,
zoom in a little bit for me, please? Thank you.
Sure. So when you log into your portal, there's several things that are going on. You have links that bring you back to certain information around the website of the melanoma website, the OM website. But in the portal, there are several things that you can do. So over here, you'll see an example of a video. This video is going to be meant to play as an overview of the portal and what you can do in the portal, how you navigate through the portal. Down below, there's a button called Profile and Preferences. Now, this will be a prompt when you log in the first time to make you come back here and ensure that you fill in information that you didn't fill when you registered. This is the rest of your demography that's being captured. And you'll see some things on here that were different from when you registered, which is great. We have some interactive pieces to track history of residence. So if you're less than 15 years, you can go in and add different addresses. We're not expecting you to remember the street address and all of that, but the city, state, country, those types of things are important, as well as the years, and you can add them from here. As well as you have some preferences that you can set, and you can upload your photo. So for this example, I'll take an image here that I have had saved, and we'll go ahead and pull up someone that you know, and we'll go ahead and save that. And sure enough, now we have, once I save the profile, we have now your thumbnail and your profile set. You can see, Chad, I've uploaded your photo here for you. So that's essentially how this portal will work. Now, what's on this portal? Over here, there's an activity corner. So there's able to be presentations and other activities that'll keep you engaged and actually offer some other ways to participate in the registry. Other things that you can sign up for and grab. There's also a support area where you can reach out to the team if you have any questions or need help. Now, this is where all the activities are. The top area here is when you have your informed consent saved, you'll have a copy of it here that you can view. There are surveys that are lined up for you. And as you can see in this example, there's several that want to be started. There's several that you can resume and continue. The way the system works, it's going to timestamp you. So wherever you exit the survey, you can come back in and finish information. The good news is, some of these surveys do have several questions. And if you don't have the time, you can pause, stop, come back and take these. And as surveys are completed, they'll show up in a table below. Now, certain surveys have areas where you might have questions that are periodically updated. For example, maybe your weight is changing over time and you want to update that. Maybe your diagnosis or new diagnoses are happening. You want to update those pieces of information. And so we're basically correlating some of those questions now below to make it easy for you to go in and update these questions versus having to take a whole nother survey again. This doesn't always happen. For the most part, this is going to be a good feature, but there might be surveys that you'll take over again just to update those questions, and it'll be all part of the process. As an example right now, I'll show you what one of these surveys looks like as they open up on the screen. So you can see how many questions you're going to have to look at. This could change based on how you answer questions. The surveys have a decision tree, so based on your answers, it may dive you deeper into other areas or skip questions. Maybe they're not applicable. So if I was to go ahead and just answer a couple questions here, could go in. If you don't know when the official diagnosis was made, but you know the year, you can type in the year and pick the month, for example. So we're allowing some flexibility there. These answers are going into the database directly. Just see how this works. So you can see there's definitely some interaction in how you can select. Some of these are multi-select, some of them are one or the other, choice related. Some fields are fill-ins, some are short answers. Now, one thing that I want to show you is as you answer questions, you're getting real live data that's popping up. This is a kind of a neat feature to give you some real interaction as to what your data looks like against the aggregate of the registry. So everybody participating, this is how you fit based on your answer. And if you ever make a mistake, you can go back and edit that answer and change it. So that's kind of how these surveys work. Now, I'm going to show you another example. So now that I'm in the survey, let's just say I finished that. When your survey's over, you have an opportunity to pull up all your answers and review them. This form will have a print button eventually, and you'll be able to print this out and bring it into your doctor when you see him. So it's a nice accompanying document to have when you go see your doctor of data that you filled in and completed on your journey, supporting information. Now, in this case, if I go back to down here, the way that we would update some of these, let's just give an example of Let's look at resume survey up here and finish this one off. So when you're done with all your questions, you have the opportunity to review them and edit them if you made a mistake. Once you finalize, the survey's locked and the record is now saved in the database. And if you come back to your portal, we should have answers that now you can update. So if I come down here, I'm able to update those answers over time. So say now that I'm in a better state and I'm able to earn a little more money. That's a good thing. And you'll be able to see that information update on the screen here. So let's get a refresh on these. These are refreshing. And so the good news is you'll be able to see your data over time change, and you can categorize and see the differences in how it works. Now, there's a whole back end to this system. Obviously, it's one thing to get the data in. It's another to see what it looks like on the back end for the team. So from the MRF team, they have an entire back end to view patient records. They can assist. They can see what surveys were completed by patients, which ones are on their track now to assign. It's all part of a process. Any documents and images that have been uploaded are all part of this back end, as well as a patient front end. And of course, it all comes down to reporting. So we've been rolling in some new reporting tools to kind of see what some of this data looks like. And just from a real simple state, if I just did a gender, we have tables, we can show bar charts, all of those things are coming. And the idea is you'll be able to have these graphs that you can see where you fit in the system, all of those good things. But I guess more importantly is what you can do with the data. So we have other tools in here that we've put in regarding pivot tables that are going to allow the team to drag and drop and create queries. I've created a few here already. So as we see how patients are coming into the system, you see data. This is a real simple drag and drop system where you can save your pivots and do different calculations on the fly. You have tools in here to do a lot of different things. I've done some already just to give you a breakdown of what I've entered. Here's one that says gender and how far was reached in school. Here's household count, person count to income levels. And, you know, again, this is all controlled via, so if I just shrink out of here, just drag and drop. So if I wanted to layer in patient ethnicity, or if I wanted to move this up here, you have the potential to just drag this in different directions. Now, if I was to show you one other example, and we come over here to primary diagnosis, I also built some queries. Again, these are things that you can look at to give you just little insights into the system, how the data is breaking down across primary OM diagnosis, symptoms, things like that. Patient experiences was mentioned. So this is going to provide a lot of insight into that area to help obviously monitor their progression, but also the total patient experience. And I believe that is what I have to show you today. I'm just looking at my notes in case I missed anything else. I guess it's just important to remember there are two facets to this system. The system's going to be here to allow the community to share their history, but also for the team to support the research and for new collaborations, as was mentioned earlier. That's what
Thank you, George.
You're welcome.
That's very exciting that we can see how far we've come. As Dr. Orloff said, the realization is nearly here. We are so close. And this just goes to show all of the hard effort that everyone in the working group in the MRF has put forward to get us to where we are today. So we have about 25 minutes left. So we'll have Dr. Carvajal give an update in regards to the registry on the academic front. And then maybe we'll allow the last maybe 5, if we have 10 minutes left, for any questions. I see a few that have come up in the Q&A, and if we have any that we have come up in between now and then. So we'll go ahead and hand it over to Dr. Carvajal.
Chad, thank you so much. Can you see my slides and hear me? I'll take that as a yes.
Yep, looks good.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. So, it's interesting. First of all, again, thank you to the MRF and CURE OM for putting this together. This has been another amazing symposium. It's interesting looking at kind of the history and the time course of the patient registry and thinking to the time course of kind of the registry that I'm going to speak about. Because the genesis of this academic registry actually started in 2016 as well, when there was an FDA funding opportunity to develop a registry in a rare disease. And that's how this started. And so this is also a 5-year process thus far. And as I think about how this is developed, as well as the Vision Registry is developed, it strikes me that process, even though it's taken 5 years, the process that I think each group has undertaken has been really critical in terms of identifying the key stakeholders, making sure that critical input is taken from the patients, the providers, the scientists, the researchers with expertise in patient-reported outcomes and so forth, the biostatisticians, really to ensure that the end product is as useful as possible. And so, I am thrilled that the patient registry is about to get launched. It's fantastic, and it's been really a wonderful 5 years working with the group to get this launched, and I'm really proud of that. What I wanted to do, and I don't want to spend too much time because I want to leave time for questions, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the genesis of the academic registry and where we are. And really, the whole point of this registry was to help facilitate the use of what's called real-world data to help improve how we're able to treat and care for our patients with uveal melanoma. And this really started clinically, because when Dr. Orloff, myself, other ocular melanoma specialists see patients with metastatic uveal melanoma, one of the first decisions that confronts us is, what is the best way to treat the patient in front of us to get the best outcomes and to maintain quality of life and to extend life, and ultimately our goal is to cure. And we do have a number of options, which include, as many of you know, regional therapies where we treat the liver specifically, or systemic therapies where we give pills or IV therapies, or perhaps we do them together. Or perhaps, sometimes it may be that the treatments we have are unlikely to work, are unlikely to make patients too sick, and maybe we really should be pursuing supportive care. And it's challenging to make those decisions, particularly in this disease where we have such limited data to help guide us. Okay, in medicine, we like to depend upon what we call randomized clinical trial data. That is, treat a group of patients with treatment A, randomize another group to treatment B, and see what's better in some sort of definitive fashion. And over the past 20 years, in uveal melanoma, we've only had a dozen randomized clinical trials conducted. Most of these were exploratory trials. The trials I highlight here in red are the randomized trials that were conducted with the intent to change standard of care if the trial hit its primary endpoint. And interestingly, of these 6 trials, 2 of the trials, including this adjuvant chemotherapy trial and this PHP trial, were unable to complete accrual, so we weren't able to answer the questions they wanted to answer. 2 of the trials, this dacarbazine and selumetinib trial and IV versus hepatic arterial infusion of photomustine, were completed but didn't really show that one treatment was definitively better than another. And 2 trials are still ongoing. And so I just use this to highlight that the data that we have to make these really important clinical decisions are just very sparse. And so absent that data, right, the question is, are there other data sources we can use to help guide what is the best way to treat an individual patient? And one way to do that is to collect what we call real-world data. And an example of that real-world data is the patient-reported data that will be collected in the Vision Registry that Dr. Orloff and Chad described. Okay, but there are other real-world data sets like standard clinical data that we can get from the electronic medical records. What are the demographics or characteristics of the patients that we're treating? What are the lab results? What are the scan results? What medications are they getting? What are the costs of the medications? What is some of the genomic data that Dr. Harbour, Professor Coupland, and others spoke about earlier in this session, and so forth. And all of these data are really, really important, but they're all held in multiple different sources. And so, you know, one way to collect all of these data in some sort of usable fashion is to create registries like the patient registry, like the Vision Registry, or like academic-based registries. The concept of building these registries and the importance of them has been recognized by groups like the US National Institutes of Health, right? And here, this is just off of the website. They clearly state that registries are important. They can provide healthcare professionals and researchers with firsthand information about people with certain conditions. And it's really critical to help increase our understanding of these conditions. The US Food and Drug Administration has a real-world evidence program. They've published guidance for drug companies to help use this real-world data to help guide drug development and hopefully facilitate it, make it quicker and easier for us to do. And some of the ways that we can use real-world evidence to facilitate clinical trial development is really to allow us to use potentially more efficient biostatistical designs. You know, ideally, reduce the number of patients that we need to answer some of these critical questions, perhaps reduce our dependency upon randomized trials, or maybe minimize the number of patients have to be treated on what we may believe to be inferior arms, but it has not been proven yet. And perhaps allow patients who are randomized to control arms to receive earlier access to investigational therapies. And so that was really the genesis of this academic registry, which it's an international effort that we call OMNI. It's the Ocular Melanoma Natural History Study. This is an international effort that's been developed again over the past 5 years under the auspices of this group called the International Rare Cancers Initiative, which is an international collaboration between groups like the US National Institutes of Health, Cancer Research UK, the EORTC in Europe, and many other national cancer organizations. When we built this, the overall objective was really to build a registry of prospectively collected real-world data that can be utilized by really all the stakeholders in this disease to generate real-world evidence to improve outcomes. And just some quick definitions. Patient registry, I don't think I have to define what this is there. I'm not going to read through that. But basically, we are developing patient registry. But, you know, we have been very important to take into account all of the stakeholders' input as we were developing this. And the stakeholders for this include the patients and the family members, the clinicians, the researchers, pharmaceutical companies, because we want these data to be useful to them to help facilitate drug development. And we've taken into account the input from regulatory agencies as well as the payers. Let me just go to the next slide. And so initially, again, when we developed this, the primary objective was really just to document the clinical outcomes of patients with this disease over time, to help provide benchmark endpoints that we could use to develop kind of statistical designs for some of the clinical trials. The objective is changing over time, which is intentional as the needs change. Another objective was to inform critical outstanding questions in the field that really are unlikely to be answered by well-designed prospective trials. So things like, you know, what is the ideal radiographic surveillance schedule? How do we best select which patients should receive a regional therapy or a liver-directed therapy versus a systemic therapy? What patient group is more likely to respond to immunotherapy, and so forth? And then finally, we wanted to use this as a platform to develop what we call a virtual uveal melanoma tumor repository, or a biospecimen repository, where we are tracking what tumor specimens, what blood samples are collected on our patients, so that if there is an important question where we need to pool samples from multiple institutions, at least we know what's housed at each center. And this could answer some of the questions about things like liquid biopsies that were discussed earlier and so forth. So this is an international partnership, as I said, between North America, the UK, which is being led by Professor Sacco in Liverpool, and in Australia by Professor Joshua in Sydney. And right now, this is a 5-center collaboration in the US, including Columbia, Thomas Jefferson, MGH in Boston, Memorial Sloan Kettering, and MD Anderson. And will also include 3 centers in the UK and 3 centers in Australia. As funding becomes available, the hope is to expand this to other centers. Our accrual goals were actually quite modest, to collect information on 1,000 patients over 5 years, but that's definitely going to be surpassed. When we look at the data that we're collecting in our registry, it does differ from the data that's collected from Vision or other patient-reported registries. And so we are collecting information regarding diagnostic procedures, biopsies, scans, what types of treatments are being provided to patients, and what are the results, and so forth. We're also increasingly focused on collecting the broad array of molecular data that's being generated on patients with this disease. And for the sake of time, I may skip over some of these, but for those of you who were able to listen to some of the sessions this morning by Professor Coupland, Dr. Harbour, and others, it's clear that there's a tremendous amount of data that's being generated about patients' tumors, as well as the patient's own germline kind of genetic status. And this has really been facilitated by the development of these tools to really interrogate the biology of cells. And so, for instance, our ability to do sequencing of the DNA, the brain of the cell, really started in the 1970s. And if you guys remember the Human Genome Sequencing Project, which was launched in 2000, the goal there was to sequence the entirety of the human genome, all of the DNA base pairs. And that process to sequence one human genome took 10 years and $3 billion. Now we're at the point where we can actually sequence a whole human genome in a matter of hours for the cost of $1,000 or less. And so that sort of power now is can be applied not just to kind of the DNA of the tumor, the brain of the tumor, but also other aspects of the genomics, like the RNA that is encoded by the DNA, or the protein that is encoded by the RNA, and so forth. And there's increasing amount of data that's important and is being generated on our patients. And so, and this I will definitely skip, but we are putting a lot of effort now in modifying the database so we can collect all of that molecular information that's being generated and correlate it with outcomes and so forth. I think it's important to highlight that there are multiple real-world data sets being generated by multiple groups, multiple individual centers, and so forth. And I highlight just 3 of those that I've been involved with. One is Vision. 2 is the Omni Registry that I just discussed. And then 3rd is Dr. Harbour's CUBE-2 collaboration. And there are others, but what's important to note is that each of these registries are collecting different sets of information that really are synergistic. And it is important, I think, for the patient community and research community to support all of these efforts. The Vision Registry is collecting really critical patient-reported outcomes that is not collected, for instance, in our registry or in the CUBE-2 registry. Our registry is really focused on the management of metastatic patients. The CUBE-2 data set has a tremendous amount of information, a little bit more geared towards the characteristics of the primary tumor. But imagine the power that there might be if we can combine these data sets somehow. And again, I think you know, the uveal melanoma community, from my perspective, has been tremendously collaborative. And I think, you know, this sort of collaboration of combining data sets is certainly possible. And I will say that we are actively working to build a patient identifier that can be shared between these two registries so that, in fact, the data can be shared. And, you know, why do we want to do that? Again, here are some of the data sets that we're collecting on our registry. If we look at vision, you know, there's a really different but synergistic set of data sets that are being collected that we cannot collect on the academic registry. Things about quality of life, perceptions of treatment, a value of, you know, do I value that treatment? What do I feel the effectiveness has been? What is the impact upon my quality of life? And so imagine if we can combine, you know, from my perspective, right, I'm giving treatment X, these are the scan results with the patient reported outcomes. What was the experience of that treatment? Was it worth it to me? And I think that provides some potentially very valuable information that we couldn't collect on our individual registries. I wanted to close with this one patient of mine. I've shown this before because it's so dramatic, but this is these are a series of PET scans from a 50-year-old patient with a high-risk uveal melanoma who underwent enucleation but ultimately developed widespread metastatic disease. And this is a patient who had all these white spots. Here are spots of cancer. This patient received immunotherapy, and after 3 months had a significant improvement. All those white spots, most of them really went away. And this patient really had a prolonged period where after this time point, we didn't do any more treatment, where virtually all of the cancer was gone. And so the purpose of our efforts, the Omni Registry, Vision Registry, the other registry efforts, are to answer the question of what made this patient different? And can we find others like her who might benefit from immunotherapy? What makes her different? And so I just want to close with this slide, just acknowledgments of the folks who are really making the Omni Registry possible. I'd like to thank Diana McDonald, Shihir Khan, Naomi Sender, and Joe Grimes, who are critical in entering data from Columbia. We have the key investigators at MGH, Dr. Sullivan, MD Anderson, Dr. Patel, Dr. Shastari from Memorial, and Dr. Orloff from Thomas Jefferson, who are participating in the US efforts, Dr. Joshua in Australia, Dr. Sacco in Liverpool. The platform we're using is something called Pulse InfoFrame, and that group has been really fantastic to work with. And then, of course, the whole MRF and CURE OM team, especially Sarah and Jackie Kraska. So with that, I will stop sharing. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Carvajal. That was a great overview of the academic registry and what the outlook is in terms of our academic portion of the development and research for ocular melanoma. There are a few questions that had come up. I believe most of these were answered directly throughout the presentation, but there is one, and I apologize, we have about 7 minutes left and we will get cut off. So if we get cut off in the middle of it, apologies to everyone in the presentation. If you have any questions, reach out to Lauren and we can try and get a more detailed answer if we get cut off in the middle of it. So this one came from the patient community, and it was more towards Dr. Orloff and Dr. Carvajal. How do you see the registry advancing research in the field of ocular melanoma? I know it was kind of overall arching, but if there's anything more specific that you'd like to provide, we can open it up with that question. I don't know who wants to take it first, maybe Dr. Orloff?
Sure. So, I mean, I think Dr. Carvajal gave some examples, certainly how the academic registry could help answer some research questions. I think the patient registry, you know, I think on the surface may seem a little bit more kind of complex, like what are we really trying to get at? But I think, you know, and Chad, I think you very well, you know, eloquently said this, that, you know, I think I see patients in a snapshot of time. You know, I see patients as the medical oncologist. I'm not there, you know, at the time that the primary eye is diagnosed, or even if I see the patient initially, but then I send the patient to Dr. Carvajal for a clinical trial. You know, I don't get to see the whole journey. And I think there's things and questions that could be answered about that patient journey that we then as providers can do a better job in directing patients. So, just trying to think of an example off the top of my head. So here we go, Chad. You always introduce yourself as a patient who chose enucleation. And patients, who've been diagnosed with a primary eye tumor are often given the option of things like plaque radiation, enucleation, or, there was a clinical trial for ARA that, had been offered at a few sites. But we never asked the patients ultimately about their decision for that and why they made that decision. And, it's a big deal. It's a big difference getting plaque radiation versus enucleation. And, I think as physicians, we look at it from much more of a scientific standpoint, what makes the most sense about killing, getting rid of the tumor and maybe, preserving vision. But there's other things that go into that decision that the patients don't always express to us. And I feel like if we were able to pull from the patient registry some of that information, we could be much better providers in helping patients make decisions or guiding them through the decision making and such like that. So, that's one of the things that I'm looking forward to about the patient registry.
Yeah, and I think, again, I think the power is going to be greatest looking at the combined data sets. And so, for instance, one of the questions I'd love to try to answer along the lines of enucleation versus plaque, for instance, is regional therapy versus systemic therapies and the impact upon quality of life. Because right now, I think Marlana, I don't know if you would agree, but I don't think we definitively know that one therapy is really better than another. I think we have our biases and we'll continue to do that. But certainly the side effects and the patient experience is different between an intermittent regional therapy and having to come in weekly for some IV therapy, right? It'd be great to categorize the patient experience for those different types of treatments. And I think that's really important to know. Another thing, as we start to build out the molecular data set in the academic registry, some of the questions that are just floating around are things like, are there particular molecular subsets of patients that might benefit from a treatment A or treatment B? And so, for instance, I think a lot of us have said in the past, well, the patients who have defects in the spliceosome machinery, so the patients who have tumors with SF3B1 mutations, for instance, they're more likely to create these neoantigens that may be more responsive to immunotherapy. And in fact, if we look at some of the relatively small data sets we are seeing some really nice responses in SF3B1 mutant patients who are treated with immunotherapy. But is that in fact true? And how can we actually answer that really important question, I think, in as definitive a way as possible. And I think to do that, you need some sort of collaborative effort like this.
Thank you, Dr. Orloff and Dr. Carvajal. One question that just came in, it was for George, but I think I actually feel comfortable answering it. George, maybe if you want to add anything. We have about 2 minutes left, so this will be the last question.
I was actually
so
answering it in the chat, so go ahead. That's perfect.
Okay, sounds good. The question is, do patients have to enter all their information at once for the surveys, or can they always enter things at a different time at their own pace? I think it's a great question. So to start, we will need some basic questions answered, like we need an informed consent saying that you agree to participate. Of course, we need to know for the MRF perspective, this information will not be shared. As Dr. Carvajal and Dr. Orloff stated, there will be a unique key to a patient, so nobody knows who the patient is. Besides the administrators of this database. So you need to identify yourself first. But in terms of the surveys, I want to say we have somewhere around 8 to 10 at this point. And as George said, they may change over time. We may add questions, we may take them away. But yes, you can absolutely start, stop, pick up, save, come to it another day, come to it another week on these surveys. They do not have to be completed at once. And I can tell you from a personal experience, I did fill one of these out on behalf of my sister who had cholangiocarcinoma. And you can do it all at once, but it is quite a time-consuming task. There will be a number of questions, and I wouldn't advise somebody to do it all at once. Take your time, answer them, whenever you feel needed. And of course, the MRF and QRM will be following up. So if we have questions that are missed or you don't pick up on it, there may be some patient engagement to kind of help remind us to go in and update things or finish surveys if we didn't complete them. I think that was a great question. With that, we are out of time. We have about a minute left before cutoff. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Dr. Orloff. Thank you, Dr. Carvajal. And thank you, George. It was a great presentation. And we are so close, and we're so happy to be where we are today. And we can't wait for the launch of the Vision Registry.
Bye, everyone.